Welcome to the Writer's Way podcast, where we celebrate writers who have completed their books and inspire writers who haven't. Join Laurie and her guests as they talk about writing, books, and life in between chapters.
Hi, everyone. It's Laurie with the Writer's Way podcast. Joining me is the gorgeous Diane Alber, and what we're talking about is how this is still so new for me. She is my second. Truthfully, you're my third, but the first one didn't quite work out, so we have to re-record it. So You're like 2.5. So welcome, Diane.
Hi.
And you'll see on the screen, Diane won't see it, but everybody else will see it. I think this is your best-selling book, Splatter. Is that your bestseller right now?
Scribbles.
Okay.
Still.
Okay, so we'll get to your books. Why don't you start off by sharing who you are, what you do, like your bio, that kind of thing. Then we'll talk about your books.
Okay, so my name's Diane, and I have a fine arts degree at ASU. Went there on a scholarship, graduated, and then got into IT because the arts didn't. You don't make a lot of money in being an artist, I guess. So I got in IT kind of by accident. I was a server as a waitress, and I do that as my day job, but I've always wanted to write children's books. I've been illustrating and painting for a long time. And when I had my children, it was kind of, you start to read a plethora of books, a lot of them. And you start to realize that, the books that I really wanted to get my children kind of weren't out there, kind of ones that really inspire creativity and things like that. There was a couple, but not as many as I'd like to see. So I saw that there was a reason to write a book for my children. And so I wrote my first book, I'm Not Just a Scribble, which was inspired by my son, who was just learning how to draw. He was 3 years old.
Yes.
And I wanted him to draw like a house and a sun and all sorts of fun things, but he ended up just drawing a scribble. Yeah. And I was like, no, draw something awesome, because I could draw something awesome. So he got really upset at me and kind of threw his paper down, and it just so happened we were like in the craft room, and these 2 googly eyes landed on his drawing, and he's like, Mommy, I did draw something. I drew a scribble. And I was like, oh, okay, this is a really cool way to start a story. So I basically made a story about a little scribble who feels like he doesn't fit in. I guess a lot of people have questioned why a lot of my books are about not fitting in. I guess when I was younger, I didn't really fit in very well. So I kind of wrote a series about being kind, mindfulness, understanding people's feelings, and kind of words hurt, things like that. So basically, Scribble kind of owns the fact that he's different, and teaches the other drawings that if they work together, they can make something beautiful. And in the end, they create a beautiful drawing together. So all my series I would say the only one that doesn't necessarily have a full moral would be Spots, but it's still about like finding the fun in every situation. But a lot of them are around kindness, empathy, mindfulness, things like that. So
that's fabulous. And so I taught kindergarten, and the younger kids would often come in and do the scribbles. And so I didn't really know what to say. I don't have a arts creative background. And I would say, oh, you did a tornado. That's great. And, and then they were really proud of themselves, and they would do a lot of tornadoes. But I have a 3-year-old, a 6-year-old, and a 10-year-old. And we sat down this weekend and we looked at your scribble book. And now I wish I was showing the scribble book. But anyway, people can go find it on Amazon. And I had ordered some stickers from you, and they were so fun. So the 10-year-old, the 6-year-old, the 3-year-old, we all sat around the kitchen table for a couple of hours doing scribbles on purpose. And what I found, it was hard for me to do a scribble. Like, it's hard,
it is,
right? As an adult, like you said, you want to do a beautiful drawing, and I can't draw, but to do a scribble, I felt like my scribbles aren't good enough. But my 3-year-old was so proud of himself, and he was keeping up with the big kids, and even the 10-year-old had so much fun with it. So he annotated it, and he started talking about, this is my face. So he would put a sad face, this is my face when I die in Fortnite. And then he kept doing that. This is when I die in Fortnite, and there's only one person left. And so they really just did their own thing with it, but it was so, so fun. So thank you.
Awesome.
Thank you for doing that. I love that. And what a great thing for teachers to, for preschool teachers and daycares and things like that, to teach the kids that are younger and maybe don't have that dexterity yet, That Scribbles are good too.
Right. Well, and I think the big thing is like every kindergarten teacher, or even art teacher, they always hear from a child, I can't draw. That's very typical.
Mm-hmm.
And with a scribble, anybody can do it. So whether you're an adult or you're a child, or even if you have disabilities of any kind, everybody can do a scribble. So what's been happening is full schools are participating, K through 8th, every single child. And so it makes it so everybody can show their artistic ability and no one's being judged, right? Because no matter what, everybody's scribble's unique. No two scribbles are alike. They're kind of like little snowflakes. And they kind of really give you the confidence. And the other thing that was really cool is while I was doing this whole thing, I didn't really understand how important scribbling actually is.
Mm-hmm.
So a lot of parents and teachers are guilty of this. They kind of skip over the scribbling phase. They want them to start writing right away. They want them to start creating shapes right away. And what a lot of people don't understand is that scribbling is a precursor to writing and to gaining your fine motor skills. So like when people go through physical therapy, if they've had, when they're trying to build their muscles back up, they're not going to just start at the highest point and start writing, right? They have to do these exercises with their hands to build the hand-eye coordination, to build the strength in their fingertips, things of that nature. And so it's funny because when I first launched the book, my son was 3, my daughter was 2, and I made Ryan scribble every day. I was like, don't draw anything that I can recognize. I only want scribbles. And so after a period of time, it was funny because he's like, Mommy, I'm kind of over the scribbles. Like I can draw full faces now. Like he gained so much control in his crayons and his pencils that it was a natural progression, which I think people think that when their child is doing scribbles that they're never going to get there. And that's not true. The more scribbling they do, and this is kind of art 101, is the more that you do something over and over again, you get bored and you want to kind of expand. So when my son is scribbling, he used to scribble outside the lines all the time. I didn't care. I'm like, do whatever you want. This is your piece. Well, then eventually he was like, well, he gained the control. So he started coloring inside the lines. And I think, I see it all the time and it's really sad. Kindergarten, even in pre-K, they get really upset about the children coloring outside the lines.
Mm-hmm.
And it's usually because the child doesn't have the fine motor skills yet to do it. So it almost is causing the child to have this resentment towards drawing and coloring because they get yelled at when they color outside the line.
Mm-hmm.
So I think the more that they scribble, the more that they create these characters, the more confidence they build, it's only going to be a natural progression. So if you see some of the scribbles now for my son, they've got full scenes, like houses, buildings, airplanes, suns, like all around a scribble, because his skills have progressed. And same thing with my daughter. They get better and better over time. People just need to be patient. It's kind of like you can't, run before you crawl, basically, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I really want to kind of make the scribble something so amazing that when a parent sees a scribble, they're so proud and they put it on the refrigerator and they're excited about it because it's only going to encourage their children to be excited about drawing and creating and ultimately writing, right? Because that's where you want them to get to, is being able to write. And so now his hand-eye coordination is unbelievable when it comes to writing. And I really, truly believe it's because of how much scribbling he did.
Yep.
And so it's kind of been a really cool process. And so all my books kind of really tap into the fine motor skills, right? The stickers obviously are a huge fine motor skill. With my new books coming out, snippets, all scissor cutting, right? So that's a big fine motor skill. Scribbling is another one, painting. So all these things are going to build your hand-eye coordination in the way that you can, really develop those muscles in your hands. So it's kind of cool.
I love that so much. I can't wait to share this podcast. I have a lot of teacher friends. I have a lot of people on my friends list who run day homes or daycares. And I think this is so, so important. And like you said, people don't realize. And it builds their self-confidence so much with that fine motor, that aspect of it that is so often just skipped over. And I just think that's brilliant. And people would maybe look at your book at first and be like, it's a scribble. And maybe not take much out of it. And then when you read it and you listen to you talk, it's so much more than that. So thank you. It's
really cool. And I think it goes after. So it's funny now because I'm seeing 3rd and 4th graders actually get into it too, because they're writing a full story. So like one of the biggest classes I remember was in third grade, and you start your creative writing, right? That's like your big thing. And a teacher of mine, I'll never forget this, drew a squiggle on the board. Okay. And then she said, you have to create this into something, and then you write a story about it. So I would do this elaborate, obviously this whole thing, it'd be this big elaborate story. But a lot of the children struggled because they couldn't draw anything, right? So now what's happening is third and fourth, same concept. They're like, here, this is your character. You can draw them in any kind of scene. You can do anything, and everybody in the class can participate, no matter what kind of artistic ability. And they write these amazing stories about Scribble, whether Scribble likes pizza and likes to skateboard on a regular basis, or like this whole thing is crazy, because it's also going into the creative mind, the creative writing. And it's funny because I was out to lunch with my aunt, and I was telling her about, I want to do International Scribble Day where everybody participates, K through 8th. Yeah. And she's like, why would 8th graders participate in scribbling? That's for kids. And I was like, okay, see, that's the kind of mentality that I'm trying to work on, that I would like everybody to, no matter what, that scribbling should be looked at as a form of art, right? So no matter, it shouldn't be looked at as a childlike form. It should be looked at as just a form of art in general, and you should be proud of it. And so I think that is, and I'll never forget the first couple scribbles, because it literally comes to life as soon as you put the scribble faces on. Like it becomes a character. It's really cool. Yeah. And I put them all over the refrigerator, right? They got really kind of intense, but children really feed off the energy of the parents, right? So as soon as they create a scribble and you get excited about it, you're like, oh my gosh, it's so amazing. Look how cool this is. They're so excited about it because they created something. They almost look for your approval, right? Yeah. So they created something that really made you excited to hang up on the refrigerator or give as a gift or frame for a grandparent or do whatever. So my goal is to eventually, I'm going to be doing like spooky scribbles for Halloween, where it's the white crayon on the black paper. And so they'll look like ghost scribbles. Yes. And then I have like a whole like ornament thing. Well, I'm going to try to do ornaments to give to grandparents for scribbles and stuff like that, is like fun ways to incorporate scribbles every day. And then basically every time someone has a card, I just make a scribble card for them. And so that's pretty much helps with that cause. So
okay, so while we're talking about that, normally I ask this at the end, but just tell people where they can find you and they can find these ideas. Like if they want to follow you and follow these ideas as you come out with them seasonally, where can they find you?
So I have an Instagram at I'm Not Just a Scribble that I post all the images. And I didn't mention too, I actually have a full lesson plan available for download, free download. It's about an 8-page lesson plan all about emotions and colors and how they react. Like basically explain to children how they can refer to themselves as blue that day if they're sad. Yeah. I put it on TPT just because it's easy to download it there. I didn't know how to do it any other way. So on my website at just DianeAlber.com, if you go under lesson plans, you'll see lesson plans for Scribble that you can download. I also am starting to put for splatter, I have a full color wheel chart on how to mix primaries to get secondary colors. And I'm also doing basically so in splatter, every back of the book has a lesson plan in it outside of Scribble. So Scribble's got the full like 8-page thing. And then splatter, spots, snippets, the whole rest of my series has what's called a next step. So it's questions you can ask the children to basically engage them in the story. Like, why did you think the house was, treated Scribble this way? Or, things like that, to really kind of engage in conversation with the child and kind of understand why, characters were acting a certain way and how your words can affect other people. So it's a really great way to do it. And it was funny because I gave some books out to my children's preschool, and one of the parents is like, I read Scribble. My son was really upset about how angry the house got, right, to Scribble. Made him really upset. And I was like, oh, well. I go, well, it's supposed to evoke emotion, right? I mean, it's supposed to. She goes, well, it's a great conversation starter about how someone's words can really make you feel upset, right? Mm-hmm. Just, not so much even actions, but just words. And she's like, yeah, he was really upset. He talked about all week about how the house was so angry. And I was like, well, that's what happens, in everyday life, people can be mean. And it's not necessarily a bullying tactic or anything.
Diane's back, and neither of us can remember what she was talking about. Because I was distracted by the face, and she had to move where she was sitting to get Wi-Fi back. So I'll move on. Because this podcast is about motivating people who want to write a book but who haven't yet. Can you speak a little bit about how you felt before? So you said that you were inspired by your kids,
Right.
and you really wanted to write the book that you were looking for and couldn't find. So what was your mindset, your frame of mind before you published? And then I'm going to ask, how that changed after you published, of course.
So I did a Kickstarter. I don't know if I mentioned that, but that's how I raised the funds to initially self-publish.
Okay.
And it was funny because once I got a successful Kickstarter campaign, I thought that I would get traditional publishers that would pick me up. No, that did not happen. So I got rejected by like 10 publishers that didn't want to pick up my book. And it was really disheartening because I was like really upset about it.
Yeah.
But I'm like, I'm just going to move forward. I had to print anyway to fulfill the Kickstarter. I had over 600 pre-orders for Kickstarter. So I got that started, and people just really loved the message. I was featured on the news. It was one of those things that was really exciting. I think the biggest advice that I could give to anybody that's writing a book is that write a book that you would read to your children. I know it sounds really weird and people don't think about that, but I think people write books that they think will sell, which is not a good way to think about it. You need to write a book that you personally would read, that you personally would share, that you personally would give as a gift. That's a big thing, and you can't necessarily have your book blinders on, I call it, because it's like your children. Like you don't see, if they're really not great at sports, you just have these mom goggles on that you just hope that they will be, but then you just kind of go, oh, maybe they're not good. You really need to be honest with the book you're writing and what the reason is. From what I've seen, and I help run a large children's book self-publishing group on Facebook, and what I've seen is read a lot of children's books, like a lot of books. Like if you want to write a children's book, you have better read hundreds, if not thousands, of children's books. And even if you don't have children, you can read them to your dog. It's fine. Just read them out loud, read them, and really be engaged with them. I probably have a library of over thousands of children's books. My husband gets really upset, but I tell him it's for research and for my children.
I'll write it off. It's fine.
Yeah, I'm like, it's fine. But I think, there's several different hurdles. The first hurdle is how are you going to get the funding to actually publish your own book? And I think a lot of people that have come to me are looking for that publisher, that traditional publisher that's going to pick them up, that agent that's going to pick them up. Yeah. And I mean, my story is, I had a successful Kickstarter. I raised $15,000, and I still don't have a publisher pick me up. So I wouldn't be discouraged necessarily. They don't like the fact that you have an audience first. It's very weird because then they can't mold you into what you like. So for instance, like they didn't like the fact that I already had kind of a book put together because they wanted to be part of that process, because that makes them worth more to me if they're part of the process of putting kind of the book together, the illustrator with the author, those kind of things. I'd already done it all. Yeah. And so they were didn't know how they would help me in that process. And that was kind of a lot of the feedback I got. And then once I'd already sold, 7,000 books, I was looking for another traditional publisher to basically take me to that new level. Yeah. And then at that point, I became too difficult to work with because I refused to make any changes with my books because I'm like, these are selling. So why would I change anything?
Yeah. Yeah.
So that was also, a struggle. I think getting from point A, you can't. So I think everybody has the same struggle is how do you stop editing? That's the other big, right? So how do you know when your book is ready to go out? Like when do you stop? And I think, they call it like you can basically edit a horse into a pig, right? So it's so much editing that it turns horrible.
I've never heard
basically.
That. Yeah.
Yeah. So like it basically can make things really bad if you just keep editing. Yeah. And so I had to finally just say, okay, I'm done. And I had a deadline because I had to meet the Kickstarter by Christmas. I had to get everybody's. So I really put myself on a deadline to say I have to get it out by this day. And that's it. Like, that's when it's going to go out. There's no other, I can't push it off another 2 weeks. I can't edit it one more time. I can't send it to this place. So, I mean, was there some edits that I could have fixed a little bit? Possibly, yes. But I think you're always going to find that. I'm sure you find it with your books too, where you're like, oh, that dot was there. Of course,
Yeah.
I'm the only one that notices it. No one else does. But you always can do another run.
Yes.
You can always do a second edition. So I think, I have people coach me all the time, especially going down the traditional publisher route. That's what how do you get picked up by a publisher?
Yeah.
And that's not really my direction. I feel like owning it and understanding the process and owning the process, you make a lot more money. You really influence a lot more people because you really own it from start to finish. I mean, you own the marketing, you own everything about it.
Yeah.
And I think the big thing is networking. I've really built a community, which has been awesome, of other children book writers, and they're all my friends. It's really hard when you're a mom to make friends. And so I've built these like friends in this children book market, and it's been awesome. So I think, kind of understanding the different processes. I think the biggest hurdles is people don't stop editing. That's number one. They will leave a book in editing for years, and they're like, oh, I've been writing a book for 10 years. Like, I don't even know how someone could do that. Like, I don't know how you can literally write a book for 10 years. At some point, I think it's when they're doing that, it's the fear of putting it out there, the fear of failure. And I don't think there's really any kind of, I don't know what makes you successful or what makes you a failure. If you've only sold 10 books, does it really matter if it made 10 children happy? I don't know, right? I mean, at that point, you got to look at it that way, right? And having your first book in your hand is probably the coolest thing on the planet. Like when you finally get that first copy, and you're like, I've done this and I made it.
Mm-hmm.
And that was probably one of the coolest things that, I experienced, which was awesome. I kind of lost your question. I'm sorry. I ramble.
That's okay. It was advice that you would give. So that's great. You're obviously full of advice. You haven't been doing this for too long, but you have learned tons along the way, obviously, and you're very business minded. So I don't know that everybody would resonate with that. And I think that's where a lot of people think if I can find a traditional publisher, they'll make all the decisions for me. And then I don't have to worry about that. I can be creative and I can just write the book and pass it off to somebody else. But for somebody who likes to be in charge, has a little bit of either willingness to learn that business side of it, or maybe a little bit of background in, marketing or something like that, then it's so much better. I agree with you to be able to make all the decisions. So yay for you for being difficult to work with.
I know, right?
And recognizing
I was like,
that.
oh, like,
you're so difficult.
I was like, how am I difficult? They're like, well, you're not. They wanted to change the title. They wanted to change the meter. They wanted to write the entire story. And you're always going to have a critic out there. Someone's not going to like your book. Someone's not going to agree with your meter or the way it's written. And I think, once again, it goes back to the original piece of advice. If you write a book that you're going to share, and that that it's something that you really think that it should be out there for the children kind of thing, I think that'll solve a lot of that problem. But another thing I'd like to bring up, I had someone bring this up to me the other day. I get books all the time that people are like, what do you think? And I feel so bad because a lot of the time they're really bad. And I don't know how to say, like, hey, maybe you should get a really good illustrator. The story's good. The illustrations are horrible. And I don't know what to say when it happens, but it happens more. Definitely invest in a good illustrator. A picture book is like 80% illustrations. I mean, literally, you can have a quasi okay story, but if your illustrations are amazing, it could be a hit. So, but it's not the other way around. You can't have a great story and really bad illustrations and it take off. It just doesn't work that way because it's a picture book, right? Yeah. So I had a girl that she tried, and her what she was trying to do was great, but it was a very tough subject to write about. Mm-hmm. It was about the death of a child, and it was very, very hard, and she was very literal. And so I think when you're wanting to write about a topic, because a lot of inspiration comes from people that want to write about really things that are close to them, whether their child has, autism or an eating disorder or something like these big topics, right? Mm-hmm. I would definitely try to do a metaphor, more so than the actual thing that you're trying to talk about. So if you want to, for instance, if you want to write a book about a child who, say, lost his limbs or something, maybe you could write about a turtle that has no legs, okay, or something like that. So make it or like a perfect example, the Ricky the Rock is a great example.
Yeah.
You know, he wrote about his daughter who had Parkinson's, and it was about a rock that couldn't roll like the rest. So it was very similar, right? She can't walk like the rest of the children. This rock couldn't roll down the hill like the rest of the children. I think it's very important that when you're conquering very tough topics, that you still need to understand that you're talking to a child, right? And that these topics can still be addressed. You can still address hard topics like cancer and death and things of that nature. But I think if you give it a metaphor, it can still have just as deep of a meaning. It can still evoke the conversation, but it doesn't scare people, because it can get very scary when you're reading these stories. And I see them. And the reason why I wanted to bring it up is I see it more than a lot of people are inspired by an event that happens in their life. And I see it more and more and more that they're writing about these very tough topics, and they're straight up saying the tough topics, like in the story. And I think that really means you just need to kind of take a step back and understand that this is a very tough topic to talk about with children. And if you make it into a story that you can eventually kind of move into that direction, then I think it's it'll be a much more successful book. And I think people are much more willing to share it, and then your voice will be heard farther, you know?
Yes. And you can explain the metaphor in your ad copy, or your, you know, on the book page, on the blurb, or in any media you put out about it, so that people understand, because otherwise they might not get it. Why does this turtle have no legs or no shell? But as soon as you explain it, like Jay explained a little bit on his Ricky that won't, or what is it? Ricky the Rock. Once he explained it, it's very eye-opening. But if you just read the book, or you just know the general idea of the book, you might not get it. And then as soon as you hear the background, it's like, oh, okay, that makes more sense. And it's in kid language. This morning, my son pressed the button on the carbon monoxide detector, the test button. So it was really loud and beeped. And then they asked what it was there for. And so I usually just tell it like it is to my kids, and I don't think about it often. And so I said, well, in case there's any poisonous chemicals in the air, you know, that will let us know, and we can leave the house. And my 6-year-old was like, what? And what are these poisonous chemicals you're talking about? And so she didn't freak out, but like every couple of minutes she would ask me another question, like, so when is that going to happen? How will we know that happens? You know, like, how often does that happen? And so I had to backtrack. And we just, as adults, we don't always realize, you know, I think often people think I'm going to tell it like it is, you know, and not sugarcoat it, because, you know, they're kids, but they have to learn about the real world in that. But they're kids, and they take things internally that we don't always think about, you know, and they lay in bed and they stare at their ceiling or at the window and they worry about things, and they don't always verbalize it to us. So I think that's really good advice for people, and especially because you've obviously been given a lot of manuscripts from other people to read, that you do see it a lot, and so you know what's happening.
And I'm not professional by any means. So like, I read a book, and some I think would be great and they haven't, and then some I did not understand it and they took off. I just try to offer as much of advice as I can. Like, so for that book that I saw, it was really hard, and I basically said, you know, there's a lot of angels in it, and I was like, you know, maybe if you just made it into an angel type book, as opposed to the child turns into an angel. It was very weird how it was transitioned. And I kind of gave it, and they're like, oh, this is really great advice. But the other thing too is these are like, when you create a children's book, it's your baby. Like, you get very personal. So when someone even gives any kind of advice outside of this is amazing, that also becomes a problem. So the other issue too is, don't go to your friends and family. Like, they're going to tell you it's amazing. So you need to put it in some sort of anonymous read group, and so they don't know that you're the author and that you're getting honest feedback, because very rarely is your family going to say that your book is horrible. I mean,
that is such good advice, because there's a mom at home thinking, I have a book, I'm going to ask my mom to read it, or my sister who teaches English, or my best friend. They're not going to tell you it stinks. Or give you ideas on how to change it. So that is really, really good advice. Don't go looking to hear that it's amazing. Go looking to find out what you can fix.
Well, I think the other thing too is that sometimes people love the book because they love you.
So like
Yeah.
if you have a message and you're like, I really did this book because, you know, I was trying to spread the word about saving water or something, right? And you have this great motivation behind it and it's a great cause. And so people are like, oh my gosh, I love this. But you can't talk to everybody on the planet about your cause. So they're not going to know what's behind it and the passion behind it. So even if everybody in your kid's class loves it, well, probably because you went in there and you talked about it and you said what the reasoning behind it was, and they liked you, so they bought your book.
Yeah.
So I think that also has a big play too, is that not necessarily just because you have a lot of people that like it, you could literally have 100 people that like it because you yourself are pushing it. Like it's like you've done fairs, you've talked to people, everything's great. I think the real test is if you're not attached to it. Like if it's sitting on a shelf somewhere and someone picks it up, what do they think? Like what is their impression of it? So I think at that point, that's when you really can dig down, because I also have that too. Well, I've sold 500 copies, which is great. And I'm like, okay, well, how many people that you actually physically talk to? Well, all of them.
Right.
I was at a fair, I sold them, but it's not doing well on Amazon. It's not doing well at the bookstores. And the other thing too, I wanted to be humble in this, is that bookstores have not been generous to me whatsoever. So every bookstore I've put in, I've sold one copy every 6 months, and it's been horrible. On Amazon, now I'm selling about 2,000 books a month on average.
Awesome.
So it's 9-day difference. Like I walk into my local bookstore and I'm trying to support the indie bookstores, and I'm like, hey, put this on your shelf. Unless you're forward facing, unless you're forward facing, you're not gonna. There's my little dog. You're not gonna be able to. No one's gonna see you.
Right.
You know. So that's the other problem.
Yes, we could go on forever about how to actually get your books sold and marketing, because you're kind of a genius about it. But let's wrap up with one last question, and this might be like the TMI question where I get awkward and uncomfortable for you. But what I really like to know from people is how much money you've made just in dollar signs, like $1 signs, no dollar signs. And the reason is so that people watching and listening get an idea of career trajectory and potential, lack of potential. But also, I want to know what the best thing is that you've bought with your money. So, for example, I can afford to have house cleaners now. And for me, that's life-changing. And I've talked about it before on the podcast because it makes my life so much better, and I'm so proud of the fact that I can pay for this, and I love it so much. So how many dollar signs have you made, and what's the best thing that you've used the money to buy?
Well, I think this is good too, because when I start breaking down the numbers, people think it's not. So if I said, okay, so on average, I make profit-wise per book around between $3.50 and $4 a book. Now, people might go, that's not a lot of money. Like, I have a lot of people go, that's not a lot of money. Well, if you times that by 2,000 or 4,000 a month, that's a lot of money. Like, and that's pure profit, right? So that's after all my expenses are paid, after my marketing. So on average, like this month, I'm going to profit about 10 grand this month.
Nice.
Everything that I've made off my books, I've literally bought more books. It's been horrible. I'm trying to stock up for Christmas. I haven't had a Christmas yet. My book Scribble will be out 1 full year in January. So this will be, my full year. Okay. I haven't really indulged on anything. I mean, when I first started making good money, I bought new windows. I was really excited about it.
Windows is huge.
They're
expensive.
Well, and I added the windows. So like it was a wall, and I made a wall of windows. Oh. So that was like my big thing for when I started to actually make money. And then I realized I was selling too fast and I needed to bulk up on inventory. And so I literally invested all the money that I made into more books. So talk to me in like 4 months when I can start to see the profit.
I think now, knocking out a piece of a wall and putting a window in is huge, because I think we all, as adults, know how expensive that must have been. So and then you get to see that all the time.
Yeah, all the time.
Right?
So it was great.
And you had to start by running a Kickstarter, and I've done that too. And so I understand sort of the feelings that are associated with that, because you're really hopeful, but you also feel a little bit desperate and vulnerable, and like you're begging people for money, and there's all these different
horrible.
there's all these different emotions
horrible.
for that. So for you to have the money to be able to turn around and invest it in buying more books without having to beg your friends
do
and
it
family,
again.
yes, I think that's huge. So good for you.
Well, and I was just trying to be smart about it, right? So everything I made from the Kickstarter run, all the profit I made from that, I literally dumped back in. And so I just kept dumping back in. Now, what really has put me behind is all the new titles that I have. If I just stuck with Scribble, I wouldn't be like technically in the hole, because I'm in the hole probably about 20 grand right now, just because I had to invest so much in inventory just to get me through Christmas, because Amazon was predicting some stupid numbers, and I don't know if it's going to come to fruition or not, but predicting like ridiculous numbers to get me through Christmas. And so I figured, you know what, go big or go home at this point. My husband was very supportive on it. I had a whole entire spreadsheet that outlines all the profit, all the marketing. And what also is very interesting, I'm an author illustrator, so that's also something I'm going to get more profit just because I'm not splitting it. So that also is a little bit different, and I can produce books faster because I kind of do everything with it. I do the illustrations and the writing, and the design, and pretty much everything of it. So everything. So, but yeah, I think so. It can definitely be a living. Like my goal. So when I first had Scribble, I was pocketing $4,000 a month. Now that I have, so it was funny. Now that I launched Splatter, it catapulted Scribble. And so now I'm making more in Scribble, and so now I'm making about $10,000 a month. And my goal is, with every new title, it's going to add more and more, because they all sell each other, because it's all part of a series. So if you like one, chances are you'll like them all. They all have the same, inspired to create type of mentality. So that's and that's another piece of advice too. Once you have something good going, don't go into a completely opposite direction. So like, it'd be like if I had Scribble, everything's great with Scribble, and then all of a sudden I write a book about plants. And it has nothing to do, there was no common ground between the two of them whatsoever. Not the same illustrator, not the same storyline. That's not going to work. Your audience is so important to you that you really need to understand that once you gain that audience, you need to capitalize on that. And that's when you're going to continue to release books. That's why you have people that follow illustrators, because they like the style, right? It's the style of illustration that they do. So I think that's really important. If you're doing a series, or just stick with, before you become popular enough, if you're trying to write 10 books, I've had a lot of people say, I've got a whole series of 10 books. And I'm like, are they at all similar? And they're like, well, no. I'm like, well, then at least stick with the same illustrator for all 5. Like, even if they're not, because you see like, there's a lot of illustrators like Adam Rex and stuff like that. They have different, or Oliver Jeffries, that have that specific style, but they have totally different stories. But it's okay, because you really like that style. Like you love that, the way it looks. So I think that's also really important, is to keep something consistent. If your first book takes off, don't start your second one in a completely different direction. Would be
good advice. Very good advice. Okay, so you have to come back on another time, because you have so much advice.
Okay, I will. Yeah. So when I get better Wi-Fi.
There you go. When you have better Wi-Fi, come back on. So I'm going to stop us here. Thank you so much. I think you're brilliant, and you have so many ideas, and I could listen to you share about them. And I look forward to meeting you in person. We're going to a conference together, and so I'll pick your brain lots then. But anyway.
Well, thanks for having me too. I appreciate it.
Oh, yes. Well, thank you. And I'm going to say goodbye. Goodbye, everybody. Goodbye, Taya.
See ya.
You've been listening to the Writer's Way podcast. For show notes, links to guests' information, and to learn more about the Writer's Way, check out lauriewriter.com. Until next week, enjoy this chapter of your life.